Welcome to the Restoration Pros Unplugged Podcast. In each episode, we're going to bring you insightful interviews and discussions with top restoration industry leaders. We're also going to delve into their business, the strategies that made them successful, and most importantly, the valuable lessons they've learned along the way. I'm your host, Clinton James. I'm also the Chief Marketing Officer at Water Restoration Marketing. We're a digital marketing agency dedicated to helping restoration companies nationwide secure more high-value water jobs. Now, this show, it aims to provide you with the knowledge and tools you need to excel in the restoration industry. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Restoration Pros Unplugged Podcast. I am your host, Clinton James. I'm also the Chief Marketing Officer over at Water Restoration Marketing. It's my absolute pleasure to be joined today by Michele Gray. Michele, thanks for being on.
Absolutely. Thanks for contacting me.
Now, Michele is the owner of Restoration CFO, a company that specializes in bookkeeping services and also offers a fractional CFO subscription service that's specifically for restoration companies. Now, I know what my audience is thinking. I've got a bookkeeper. My significant other does the books. I can throw a rock and hit a bookkeeper nowadays. What makes Michele uniquely qualified to help restoration companies is that she actually owns one. She is the owner of Verity Restoration. They've been in business over 7 years. They're out in Portland, Oregon, which I know for a fact is one of the most competitive markets for restoration companies in the country. So I think that experience mixed with the services that you offer really means you're going to bring some value to our audience today. So Michele, let me stop talking for a minute. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the services that Restoration CFO offers?
Yeah, so we have a subscription model where we will take all of the accurate bookkeeping that you have, and then we will put it through a whole set of reports and processes. And then also you end up with customized KPIs, which I realize that word's out there a lot, but the thing that we add is that there are action items. So you're not left with a percentage of some random words and you go 40% current ratio. I don't know what do I do? Like, that doesn't mean anything to me, right? It's just nonsense.
Right.
So we actually have action items where we tell you these are the pieces involved to get to these KPIs. These are the things to go check now, based on the fact that this is going up or this is going down, or we provide a video too that walks you through all of it that's personalized. Also, we track your cash flow and your business forecast to see if things continue at this same pace, where will we be in 3 years? And is that where we're trying to go? Okay. We also have the ability to model out, I want to add a truck in a few months. Is that a good plan? And we can go, well, for the first few months, this is how much cash that's going to draw down, because the expenses, you get this expenses at first before you actually start benefiting from them.
Sure.
And then it'll track out, this is what your cash flow will look like, 3 months after that, as you start recouping some of that cost. When's the right time to put this expense in our plan? We're able to forecast all of that out, so they can kind of see the ramifications and the benefits from making different sets of choices like that. So that's what the monthly service provides, sort of a set of eyes with accounting knowledge that's looking over all the finances. Okay. And I think people hope that that's what their CPA does. I know 20 years ago, going into business in a different industry, that's what I naively hoped that my CPA did, was look at my finances and tell me if something looked funny or off. To find out, no, they just get your numbers at the end of the year, plug it into the tax software, and tell you how much you owe. That doesn't do you the good you're hoping, right? You're like, no, I need like a finance person checking this. So that's the hole we're hoping to fill with this, where an actual set of accountants is looking at your data, looking at it from having industry knowledge as well, and then being able to interpret those KPIs that are thrown around, and tell you what to go check on, and help you kind of dig into what your cash flow is going to look like as well.
Now, did you have, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to kind of, but did you have kind of like an aha moment and owning a restoration company where you realized, hey, this is really important to the growth of our business, and I can take this and I can help other restoration companies?
Well, I would say my bad experience 20 years earlier, where we kind of crashed and burned, where had I had some input earlier, we could have saved ourselves a lot of time and money. So I've had that experience where I was like counting on my CPA, and then I was like, oh, that's not what they do. Having that kind of backfired for me. And then having run several different businesses since, and then coming to this industry, it's kind of almost like a backwards aha moment, coming to this industry where the focus is on, maybe not the focus, but at least in social media, as you're following the different groups on Facebook, etc., the conversation revolves around fighting the insurance companies, the fact that this is emergency services, so it's not super planned out ahead of time, so you don't always know what's coming in. There's a little bit of a variable stream of work to be done, which is what you guys can help with.
Sure.
But the narrative is almost backwards. Also, only being able to charge what Xactimate will allow you, which I think is not correct, but that's sort of the narrative, and sort of like these outside forces are pushing on us. And because of that sort of set of unique circumstances, because of this business model, I think people are a little bit overlooking the fact that this still is just a business. It's a service business. Stepping back further, it's a business, and you present yourself to the world going, this is what I can offer. This is for the dollar amount with which I can do that profitably. Only under those circumstances should I be doing business. But I think that gets overlooked a bit because we're worried about what we can charge, what they will pay, if we're going to get the money at all. We kind of get wrapped up in that weird niche nuance sort of this business. Yeah. And we kind of forget it's a business. So when I kind of saw that dynamic, and there are a couple gentlemen that run a program that teaches how to use Xactimate correctly, where you're setting your prices as opposed to arbitrarily adding money to Xactimate pricing and just hoping that's going to work. Because that's one of the workarounds, right? Is like, well, we'll just charge more than Xactimate. Well, they're out there teaching the excellent principles of how to use it properly. But you have to be able to put in your actual loaded labor rates. You have to be able to put in your actual costs. And I think people maybe they don't have the pieces in order and the steps to figure out what those loaded labor rates actually are for it to then be defendable. So when I saw these guys with what I think is the appropriate solution to being able to charge what you need to cover your overhead, but then maybe not the knowledge out there as to how to get to those numbers, that kind of got me thinking, like, let's turn this back into more of a business rather than this super niche, we're controlled by the insurance company's conversation. Let's flip the conversation and get it back to, this is a service business.
Well, I think
around it.
One of the things that I really like about working with this industry is the people that I get to work with. And most of them are what I affectionately refer to as blue-collar entrepreneurs, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of them came from, maybe it's a general contractor background, maybe they cleaned carpets. And a lot of them, this restoration business is really the first business that they've ever owned. So it's not from a lack of effort or even a willingness to learn. They just don't have that experience in terms of successfully managing the financial components of a restoration business there. Now, we have an audience of all sizes of restoration companies, right? We've got guys that are owner-operators that are still in the truck, right? They might have 1-2 crews. They subcontract out a lot of their labor. And we also have guys that have, in our audience, that have multiple locations. They've got an entire financial department. You have a sweet spot in terms of restoration companies where you feel like you can bring the most value. So talk to the audience about the type, the size, and maybe even the annual revenue that you think is ideal for a prospect that should be looking at a fractional CFO.
Yeah. So for the littler guys, I think that all that's necessary there probably, until they start to really want to grow, would be to have accurate bookkeeping in place, have an accurate chart of accounts that's tracking things so that when they want to grow, they have the numbers in place so that as they're growing, they can keep going to the correct spot so we can see, are we growing safely? Do we have cash flow to continue to grow? That's maybe up to about $1 million a year, maybe a little less, somewhere around that $1 million mark. And it's almost more predicated on the amount of growth you're wanting to do, the amount of expansion. At the point where you're trying to aggressively grow, that's where you very carefully need to be tracking your cash, because you can be profitable without being able to pay your bills.
And well, let's talk about that part, because we had talked about this earlier. There is growth from a marketing standpoint. I'm always encouraging my clients. Let's get you more jobs. Let's grow this business. Let's hire another technician. Let's get another service vehicle. But even a profitable company that's growing can still run out of money, right? So talk a little bit about that. What does that mean, and what are the ways that you help identify and keep that from happening with the clients that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's, in practice, I feel like that's one of the biggest misconceptions that I see with my clients, because they interpret the lack of cash to mean we need to be calling more aggressively on our receivables. And 100% that's true. But then once they get that money and they have that big chunk of money now sitting in their account, they're going, well, that's the last time we're ever going to have a cash flow problem. Well, if you're never growing again, maybe that's true. But the second that you're growing, you're paying more labor, you're taking on bigger projects. Oftentimes that comes with a longer time before you actually can get paid as well. That combo, buying more materials than you're used to, that combo is a killer on cash. And I mean, for the most part, you can probably limp through kind of, because you know you have that money in accounts receivable. You know you probably will get most of it. It's probably coming. So for the most part, maybe you can limp through. But man, is that a stressful place to be, where you know you've had guys that have just done work for you and you can't pay them. Like, I'm trying to help relieve some of that stress. So you go, yeah, I know I'll be able to pay the bills next month or next week or tomorrow.
Do you find that more commonplace in companies that not only do the mitigation services, but also do the rebuild services? Because I feel like on the rebuild side, there's a lot more outgoing cash flow in terms of labor and materials. And if you're picking up both the mitigation and the rebuild part, there's probably even a further finish line in terms of when you're actually going to collect money on that job. So is that something that you see when working with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think also on the rebuild side, the net profit perhaps is a little less too.
A little less.
So there's less cushion there as well.
Right.
So that combo is really, detrimental.
So I've talked to restoration companies that only do mitigation, and they tell me, and that's their entire business model, and I get that, right? They're telling me that it's because you can make 60+% margins fairly easily with mitigation work, right? Equipment does a lot of the work. You don't have to hire necessarily the most expensive skilled laborers. And you know, it is what it is when you do mitigation work. However, a lot of my clients feel like they leave a lot of money on the table in terms of not doing contents, in terms of not doing rebuild work. So with your restoration company, have you always done the full restoration services, or do you stick to mitigation, or what does that look like for you? And how does that impact how you guide your clients in terms of those additional services?
We have chosen to stay relatively small, because when you're relatively small, you can keep those margins really, really high.
Right.
And I think it's a matter of personal choice as far as how much stress level you want to take on and how carefully you want to have to be watching everything like a hawk, right?
Right.
And my husband and I have run businesses in the past where we've had a lot of overhead and very small margins, and we've made money, but man, you have to be on top of it. Where kind of chilling more in the just mitigation space, you don't have to be as careful. You don't have to, I mean, of course you have to be careful with like safety and customer service and all of those ways. But the cash flow itself isn't quite as tight. So to answer your question, we have done some contents. We do some rebuilds on occasion. We leverage those items where we have specific clients that are on a very tight timeline.
Okay.
And so we do it more as a service to them, not because it's where we know we're making lots of money or not because it's our favorite niche to be in necessarily. But we know we work for a lot of nonprofit housing, and we love doing that because we love to help out there. But we know every day that they have their resident in a hotel or something like that, the person's very much inconvenienced, and it's very expensive for this nonprofit. So we know on these smaller jobs where you're going to have a hard time getting a drywall contractor, we'll just take care of it for you, so that we can kind of, as a service, get it done. And so I think as far as my clients are concerned, many of them are growing quickly because that's when I'm of the most help, and have the end goal to sell this when they retire or sell this sooner. So they're growing with a different goal in mind, where we're kind of going, how low key and low stress can we make this business for ourselves? They're going, we're going to gun it so we can actually sell this huge company. So my personal choices versus what their end goals are end up with a very different product. The KPIs are different that we're looking at. The amount of eyes that need to be on it are very different. Okay. So it's sort of a funny dichotomy, because the restoration company I've built is not exactly the ones that I'm here to help the most with.
Okay.
Because I've chosen to alleviate the stress by staying smaller intentionally, where as they're trying to grow quickly, that's where you've got to have your business act together the most, right?
Do you feel like the infusion of private equity money into the home service space is really changing the way business owners are looking at restoration companies? I mean, it used to be you started a business like this so that your son could come work for you, or your daughter could come work for you, and your grandchildren would then inherit that business. Seems like nowadays, with that infusion of private equity money, people have an exit strategy. Like, I want to build this business to X amount in revenue so that I can sell it this multiple in the next 5 to 10 years. Is that kind of the conversations that you're having with people that you're working with?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I definitely have clients that are both of those.
Okay.
I have people who are in the process of handing this over to the next generation, and they're trying to get everything tidied up and really well organized so that they are handing this over in a good spot, where they know where they're at financially, cleaning up old, AR issues and some old weird issues that they want to hand this over in good condition. And then also, certainly, we've been approached to have our business bought or some, and we just kind of, personally, we shut that down pretty fast. But I think the people that are coming into this because it's a good business model to grow a thing and then sell it, but are coming in sort of not from the carpet cleaner technician who's now turned into their own boss, not that route, but from like, they have an MBA, they look for an industry that's growing. That's how they got here. So I certainly have a few clients like that also, right? And like,
so do I.
Fantastic, it's fine.
So do I.
Totally fine. They're coming in more with the business mentality that I'm trying to help infuse with the guys that aren't coming to it from business school. So I think it would be raising the competitiveness, certainly. And I'd love to help the technicians succeed in that environment that may be becoming more competitive as we go along.
I love that. All right. So one of the things I really want to do on these podcasts is really deliver some value through like actionable items, right? Mm-hmm. So for someone that is, let's say, on the smaller side, are there like 2 or 3 big mistakes that you consistently see when you open up the books for a restoration company that, let's say, is doing, somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million annually in revenue? Are there 2 or 3 that you could identify and say, hey, watch out for this or watch out for that?
Yes. I mean, I think that the thing that would concern me the most would be when people know, when they're presented with their financial statements. And I think even people that have their wife doing the books, or a bookkeeper that's more like an office manager, right, rather than a bookkeeper that's like a trained accountant, right? Those are kind of, it's the same word that gets thrown around, but it's kind of 2 separate things.
100%.
When it's more of an office type manager. So, but still probably the owner is getting those financial statements printed from QuickBooks Online or whatever and handed to them. And I know I was in this position 20 years ago too. I was there. This is how I know. They'll look at the profit and loss, and that's the one that they're the most familiar with. And they'll know to check the bottom for the net profit. And that's kind of the most of the information that they're getting out of those financial statements.
Okay.
And that is an important number. But there are definitely several other things you need to be looking at also.
Okay.
Which I didn't used to know about. So like, no judgment. The cash flow statement, I feel like the next level would be they're pretty comfortable with the P&L and they know what they're looking at on the balance sheet. I think it's a little bit rare that anyone is even printing out and looking at, hopefully reading from a PDF these days, but looking at the cash flow statement.
Okay.
And understanding, a better understanding of those financial statements and what they can tell you, I feel like is really critical for business owners at any point where it's more than just themselves, one truck. You've got money coming in, you can pay yourself. At that point, you're kind of okay. But if you're going to grow any further than that, you really need to get familiar with what those financial statements can tell you, all 3 of them as a unit, because they work together. It's not like a single statement sort of situation.
So wait, if I'm looking at a P&L statement, I see a lot of profit there. I could be one commercial job away from being out of business if my cash flow is not right.
Well, and like even worse than that, you may not even need that one job because it's not showing like payments on your vehicles. Those go on your balance sheet. Those aren't even on the P&L. So this is showing the money you made before you paid any of your loans that month. Those don't go on the P&L. So who knows? You made 40 grand, but you have 50 grand in loan payments you have to make a month. You're already underwater, but it looks like you have 40 grand, right? And then depending on how they're paying themselves, that might just be coming out as owner's equity. And if that's just coming out as owner's equity withdrawals for that owner's salary for their labor, that wouldn't be on there either. So it's a little bit how you've set up your chart of accounts and how you're thinking about things really changes what that number means at the bottom line. And every business is different how they've set it up. So if you're hearing numbers and you think, hey, how is he doing that? And I'm doing this, and you really may not be comparing apples to apples. So in some ways, don't take that too seriously unless you can analyze both of your of your financial statements and see what's getting included where. But that net profit line, that bottom line of the P&L it's not telling you the whole story.
Okay. All right. On the flip side, in addition to people that don't necessarily have a home service background, I also see a lot of folks that maybe owned a successful restoration company becoming consultants, right? So they're going in and they're helping a business from a sales and marketing standpoint. They're helping the business from an operations standpoint. What you do is equally as important. So talk a little bit about your experience in kind of partnering with consultants to make sure that they're getting the right numbers, to make sure that they're advising their clients in the right decisions in terms of paths towards growth and adding additional vehicles and increasing their service area and those things.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think earlier with the CFO process, I sort of explained, before we can even start the CFO process, the bookkeeping side has to be in order. So we do that as a service to clients so that if they come to us and everything is tidy, fantastic, we're ready to go, off to the races. That bookkeeping portion before, though, if they're like, it's a mess, I don't know what's going on back there, We have to get that tidied up before we can even look at the cash flow, look at the financial statements. And then once we've finished that process, the company is in a great position to then have their consultant act on that information on the operations side, on the sales and marketing side. I think consultants occasionally are going to run into trouble trying to just get access to the financial statements and use those numbers to then go execute on, because those numbers may not be very valuable because they're not very accurate. So, and they may not take the time to dig into the bookkeeping to see why they're not accurate. So hopefully we're just an excellent handshake point once we've gotten to the end of that CFO process and we go, everything's accurate. Here's where your cash is at. So if your consultant wants you to be able to go spend money in places, here's what you're dealing with. Here's what you have available to you. And here how the KPIs are trending and that sort of thing. And they actually are accurate. So we've gone back and looked and really dug in and checked and rearranged what was going crazy places. If you have your referrals going to your materials account or whatever, the amount you're spending on referrals is not going to be properly accounted for. Not that I haven't just seen that just recently. So when you dig in there, you go, oh, well, the consultant would have made different choices had he realized that those numbers were in the wrong spot, right? He would have been a little worried about the materials being a little high. He would have been, going, oh, your marketing, though, is really low. When that's not the truth. The materials were fine. The referrals were just in the wrong spot.
You mean people are paying for referrals from plumbers and HVAC companies and property managers? I've never heard of any such thing. So,
on occasion.
All right. So I guess my next question for you would be, let's say I'm listening to this podcast right now. I've built what I consider to be a fairly successful restoration company, but I'm the guy doing the books right now. And every time I open up QuickBooks, I'm doing just what you said. I'm looking at that bottom line of the P&L and I'm like, okay, everything's great. If that person wants to reach out to you, what's the best way for them, a consultant, somebody that's got a successful restoration business that they want to prepare to sell off to private equity or some other entity there? What's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, they can certainly go to my website, which is restoration-cfo.com. And then I have a Calendly link on there, and I'm happy to set up.
Yeah, we will drop the Calendly link in the podcast notes and the YouTube notes so everybody can reach out to you directly. Michele, any last tips that you can give our audience in terms of just making sure, especially the smaller guys that are really looking to grow, any tips that you can give them starting like tomorrow, things that they should be looking at to make sure that they're setting themselves up on a good financial foundation?
I mean,
besides use Restoration CFO for for bookkeeping instead CFO services.
I'd love that everyone could help themselves. I'd love to work myself out of a job by providing enough education that they know what to go check for themselves. Mm-hmm. That would be fantastic. I'm in the middle of putting together a series of videos of how to check and see if your bookkeeper is working you towards an audit, or I might reword it a bit, but that's the theory. There's things you can go in and check, like the trial balance, for example, that if you know what you're looking at, you should have a very clear picture from there, whether all the accounts are where they should be sitting or if things are very crazy. And I think most people don't know where to go check that, how to go check that, what it should even look like when they're in there. But it's a pretty easy way with a few clicks to kind of just glance and see what you're dealing with. So if owners can go in there and check the trial balance and know what they should be seeing, they don't have to have enough knowledge to fix it themselves, but at least they would know, I need to pause here and call a bookkeeper with accounting, like an accountant, not a tax accountant, but a very knowledgeable bookkeeper with how accounting works, rather than doing it myself because I'm messing some stuff up. QuickBooks leads you, I'm sure the others are not much better. The more AI that they add in, the more that they're giving you suggestions that are not correct. And I know when you don't know what you're dealing with, you go, well, that sounds kind of right. And you click the buttons it suggests and you badly mess things up. And it's not even really your fault. It kind of like led you down the wrong track, right?
Well, Uncle Sam won't care if it's your fault or not. And, your business, it's dependent on cash flow, dependent on good margins to grow. So you want to make sure set yourself up on a good foundation. And QuickBooks AI is probably not the most sound financial foundation there. Michele, I want to thank you for your time. I want to encourage my audience. Check Michele out at restoration-cfo.com. You are on social media as well?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we'll make sure that we drop those social media handles in the show notes as well there. So, Michele, been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. We'll probably bring you back because I'm going to get some questions here and we'll talk a little bit more through some of those questions there. But for the audience, thank you guys for sticking around. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to the Restoration Pros Unplugged Podcast. We'll be back with more interviews and insights from entrepreneurs and professionals in the restoration industry. So until then, stay safe, stay dry. And since Michele's here, make sure you guys stay profitable. All right. Thanks again, Michele.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Restoration Pros Unplugged podcast. If you like what you heard today, be sure to subscribe, share, and also leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back with more interviews and discussions with restoration industry leaders really soon. In the meantime, if you're a restoration company looking to add more high-value water jobs, you can reach me and my team at waterrestorationmarketing.net. Again, that's waterrestorationmarketing.net. I look forward to hearing from you soon.